Welcome to Regulatory Rambling. Our podcast is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SCF FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, and the HKU edX Professional Certificate in FinTech, with support from the university's Faculty of Law. I'm your host, Ajay Shandasani. In our initial spotlight section today, we'll be speaking with Raoul Montgomery and Kirsty Crean of executive search and recruitment firm Arion in Hong Kong about hiring trends in the legal and compliance space post-Chinese New Year, a time when many professionals decide to pursue new roles, in some cases, entirely new careers. Following that, we'll have a chat with Brian Yeung, Interactive Brokers Hong Kong-based General Counsel and Head of Compliance for APAC. But first, we're a month and a half into 2025, and with the Lunar New Year behind us, it's customarily a time for many in places like Hong Kong to wait until they receive their customary Chinese New Year bonuses before tendering their resignation letters to seek better pay, seniority, prestige, greater responsibility, or simply put, just more satisfaction with other employers. And the legal and compliance space is no different. Based in Hong Kong and London, Arion is a top-tier provider of executive search and market intelligence services, specializing in regulatory compliance, ESG governance, financial crime compliance, legal, and risk management. And with us today, we have Raoul Montgomery, a research consultant with the firm, along with Kirsty Crean, Arion's director for the Hong Kong office. And Raoul and Kirsty, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us on. It is an absolute pleasure and an honor. You know, having followed the podcast for some time now and understanding some of the incredible names that you've had on, we're clearly doing something right and having been invited. So thank you so much for the platform and for having us.
You're too kind. And your firm's reputation, precedes it. So post-Chinese New Year, what do you see as the hiring trends in the legal and compliance space in Hong Kong? And I don't know if you want to extend that to elsewhere in the region, Singapore, but I mean, mainly because we are based in Hong Kong.
We have definitely noticed an upturn, particularly after last year. Hiring throughout 2024, specifically within the investment banking space, was probably best described as cautious at best. The good news, however, is that this was in part cyclical. It's a trend that tends to reemerge during every US presidential election year. Firms essentially like to sit and wait before they can assess their hiring needs on the basis of any federal amendments to financial or regulatory policy. That being said, though, we finished the year very, very strong and are happy to announce that 2025 has started very, very busy. We have our best pipeline for some time going into Q1, and there generally does appear to have been a significantly positive shift with widespread confidence in future opportunities within the region. Something we've noticed in particular since COVID is that people are avidly choosing to come back to Hong Kong following an exodus of sorts after 2020. The reality is that Hong Kong offers so much to candidates, both on a professional and a personal level, that people are once again realizing that it is one of, if not the best cities on earth to live and work. Interestingly, though, however, what we have picked up on is that while Hong Kong is undeniably getting considerably busier than it has been for a number of years since the pandemic, there has been a noticeable shift in hiring trends. Things are definitely different, and we're sort of, at least for the time being, in the middle of a new normal of sorts. As stated earlier, the investment banking space, at least for the time being, is relatively quiet, with the exception of a few very, very key hires at senior, if not at CCO level. However, it's very important to note that areas such as the insurance space, wealth management, family offices, as well as high-frequency trading and crypto firms remain very much in growth mode, to say the least. And they are eagerly seeking out talented professionals across the spectrum and at varying degrees of seniority. Similarly, there is a growing demand for candidates with experience in sanctions, investigations, as well as regulatory litigation. So, in summary, we may not be seeing the value of work as we were pre-COVID, probably about 30% less than maximum capacity post-pandemic. I mean, pre-pandemic rather, but there has undeniably been a massive rise in hiring with a significant market for high caliber legal and compliance professionals, both in Hong Kong and in Singapore. So it is looking up. 2025 so far seems to be a very, very busy year, and we're very much excited.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that question and sort of looking as a whole post-Chinese New Year, I think, we feel an element of positivity. And I think looking back a year ago, the market felt a lot more cautious, and I think we're starting to see a real variety in terms of opportunities that are becoming available in Hong Kong, but also Singapore as well.
Yeah, I concur with that, because about this time a year ago, from the recruiters I was speaking to, and certainly some of the smaller outfits, they were wondering what they were going to do next. Some of them were telling me, were it not for the work I'm getting from Indonesia or India, they were like the local market, they said, would dried up, and they were being told to focus more on the UAE because that's got a burgeoning fintech crypto scene, and lawyers are needed for that. But I'd like to come back to something you said, Raoul, that sanctions. I mean, for the longest time, sanctions was viewed as an adjunct of AML, KYC, CTF, but it seems to have just spun off into a specialization and a profession in its own right. Is that the sense you're getting, that they genuinely want people who know sanctions inside and out?
You're actually exactly right. You're right on the money insofar as sanctions are concerned. In today's global financial landscape, compliance with sanctions frameworks at financial institutions has become absolutely essential and is very much at the forefront of any form of regulatory adherence. I'd recently released guidelines from the United States, as well as the EU, have certainly underscored heightened accountability for financial institutions regarding sanctions compliance. Specifically from a US perspective, at least with large leading US institutions, be it on the buy side or sell side, there appears to be an increased emphasis on due diligence, specifically with regards to export-related transactions, particularly when items may be directed to sanctioned countries. In contrast, European firms appear to be very focused on asset freezes and are positioning banks as crucial gatekeepers within the financial system. So sanctions, as you said, is perhaps being emphasized more so than it has been for a number of years. It is almost emerging as an industry in of itself, and that's frankly an understandable byproduct of geopolitical and economic uncertainties across the globe. So the sanctions professionals, yes, will very, very much be in demand across the spectrum.
I also think we're just seeing it naturally when we're out speaking to individuals, candidate backgrounds, various clients across different sectors. Back in the day, we wouldn't really have been specifically asked about people with just pure sanctions backgrounds, and now we are. And so we're going to have to see a catch up in the market for people really specializing within the sanctions space.
Well, you mentioned that there's more hiring in investigations. I mean, if we were to look at, if we were to divvy up the financial world into, just the big ones, banking, investment banking, insurance, hedge funds. Who's hiring for investigations?
In regards to investigations, at least some of the roles that we've predominantly been working on, we have noticed a significant growth, specifically within the corporate sector, with various large multinational companies with a presence in mainland China actively seeking to bolster their regulatory arsenals.
So it's the MNCs.
Yes. So, I mean, that's definitely been one of the key areas that we have noticed to be specifically looking for investigations professionals. And there's also evidence of the fact that following what was a few, let's just say, difficult years, the perception towards China and Hong Kong is significantly changing and becoming a lot more positive, which is prompting professionals to be more inclined to work within that space. As such, key skill sets being sought out amongst candidates would be backgrounds in corporate compliance, as well as in investigations. And so far, leading into or following Chinese New Year, we have seen a significant surge within the corporate compliance and investigation space, as I said, with institutions based in the mainland or with a presence in mainland China.
Anecdotally, I'd heard that the greatest demand for investigators was in the insurance sector, because they're seeing skyrocketing amounts of insurance fraud, and so that's just causing them to beef up their compliance teams in general. I wasn't sure if you heard anything to that effect.
Well, the insurance sector has, again, certainly been one of the most prominent areas of demand for regulatory professionals. I mean, last year we saw a number of notable moves and market developments leading into this year. And again, I believe that the surge in, or the rising demand for esteemed regulatory professionals within that space can probably be explained best by the increasing complexity and the diversity of insurance products on offer, compounded by what has been an undeniable wave of innovation in response to emerging risks such as climate change, cybersecurity, as well as what is a very rapidly urbanizing population. As a result of that, we've actually noticed insurance firms looking to recruit like senior candidates with transferable skill sets, either from a private wealth or a banking background, given the emphasis that they have on, as I said previously, certain transferable skill sets. And we do expect this trend to continue because firms will continue to seek out top professionals, be it on the investigations or the compliance side, to facilitate what would be a smooth transition to what may be the new landscape of insurance regulation as a whole.
Certainly, the impression one gets when you look at LinkedIn, when you look at eFinancial careers, that the number of openings you're seeing in the last 6 weeks to 8 weeks, the growth has been notable. Given the time frame we're in, right after Chinese New Year, or is the demand really there? Because I've also been hearing that many firms might hire someone at the senior level. They're less inclined to do so at the mid to junior level, and that they're in retainment and retrenchment mode, and they're hiring freezes at some banks and financial institutions and multinational corporates. Are you seeing the mid-tier and the junior level professionals being squeezed out?
I think there are always hiring freezes in firms. Exceptions are always made for senior strategic hires. I think, we've seen that across time. In the last few years, I think people have been really cautious in the junior to mid-level. If you look at banking, with all the cuts and restructures that we've seen in the market, a lot of people are kind of keeping their head down. And so we've seen a little less movement within that space, but with senior compliance hires happening and also several regulatory investigations happening across banks, crypto and wealth, a lot of the junior to mid hires are going to be naturally made off the back of this. They need more feet on the ground. And I think also, on a side note, with what you're saying about sort of that mid to junior level, I think firms are starting to recognize that they need to invest a little bit more within that space or within that level of talent. That may be as a result from noticeable change in work culture. They've had a lack of guidance simply by not working closely with senior people to get guidance from, and very much a hangover from COVID. Obviously everyone working from home. So I think we're just going to see a real active focus in moving forwards, improving that part as well across firms.
With relation to hiring freezes, specifically at the junior to mid level, as stated, that does tend to happen every now and then. But the main reason I believe behind that would probably be the drastic change in work culture as a result of the COVID pandemic. Simply put, junior to mid level candidates, and I think this is something that everyone will agree with across whatever professional field they are in, is they benefit very largely of exposure to seniors, people to learn from. And for the longest time, particularly in Hong Kong, remote working arrangements did not necessarily allow that to happen. But there has been
Absolutely.
a change. And if you're working from home every single day, it's obviously difficult to make an impression or to learn from your seniors. But that has changed. Firms are, again, at the very least, going into a more flexible approach to working. So having done that, hiring freezes for junior to mid-level ranks will definitely come to an end, if not entirely. They just needed exposure to seniors.
A perennial question is, yes, there is a legal and regulatory component to compliance, but do lawyers necessarily make the best compliance officers when, for the longest time, the stereotype, and as members of the older generation are retiring and being phased out, this cliche is less true. For the longest time, the stereotype was it's a place for burnt out lawyers and accountants, and or it's seen as the plum retirement job for former military, law enforcement, intelligence types.
Well, there always will be a number of individuals from those backgrounds who want to move into a more in-house space, but I feel like it generally speaking depends entirely on their personal preferences based on what they sort of want from their career. A lot of legal professionals may opt to move into a compliance space, potentially even for a new challenge. We speak to a number of lawyers whom potentially look for ways by which they can sort of expand their own professional repertoire. So I feel like the general consensus of it being as you said, retirement home, that perception certainly has changed. And obviously the sort of preferences which they look for within candidates, be they senior lawyers or senior compliance officers, has evolved. A lot of the old guard, so to speak, will potentially even be expected to have a greater degree of, for lack of a better word, soft skills than they previously would have done. So the industry in that sense is certainly changing, and priorities, specifically for a lawyer to move in-house or into compliance, I believe that it may just be a case of people wanting to find new challenges. Compliance and regulation now is probably more exciting than it ever has been. Firms are trying to find a balance between innovation and oversight, and senior professionals who understand the dynamics and the intricacies and complexities of regulation are certainly the best way to go about doing that. So perceptions in regards to lawyers moving into compliance, specifically, again, within sanctions and digital asset space, have drastically changed because of the evolving nature of the industry.
And we can see a clear shift towards hiring candidates with mix of skills. So tech, law, and compliance. We don't really get requests for just sort of one singular skill set. I think the market's changed. We're looking at higher caliber these days. And so we really do see a bigger breadth of expectation now for your compliance officer.
Is a law degree a prerequisite, or is it fair to say that there are individuals from other walks of life who have equally enriching backgrounds and would make perfectly competent compliance officers?
Given the nature of a law degree, and I can say this as someone who is currently in the midst of completing one, is that, again, to re-emphasize what I said about transferable skill sets, is that a background in law and a background in having studied law certainly will put you at an edge, or give you an edge in regards to a career within the compliance space, because you do understand the nuances associated with policy, why policy needs to exist the way it does, and it definitely does warm you up, for lack of a better word. But what we have noticed in today's sort of hiring market is that there is a far higher emphasis on soft skills than organizations had done previously. Compliance is now understood as a critical risk to companies. So as such, hiring, particularly at the executive level within the APAC region, is now perhaps more than ever centered around a balance of both IQ and EQ. So soft skills and the ability to the desire to want to learn and a distinct interest within the area of work is something that people do look after. Communication skills in particular. And irrespective of the background you come from, so long as you can demonstrate a transferable skill set, which law does allow you to do, then I think that it's an incredible time to sort of go into regulation as a career, or to think about sort of entering into a regulatory career, so to speak.
I think the world as well of compliance and financial crime as a whole is changing, and a little bit like you mentioned before in terms of the increase in sanctions and that becoming almost a beast of its own. Similar with the backgrounds that we're looking for. I mean, legal or law backgrounds are always going to be very appealing within the compliance space, but we also are seeing a bigger diversification in terms of roles within compliance and financial crime, which will inevitably require different backgrounds coming into them.
Increasingly, the crypto space, the fintech space, is looking for compliance officers tailored to its needs. And I'm wondering if you've been doing what might be called plain vanilla compliance at a mainstream financial firm, how easy is it then to become a quote unquote crypto compliance officer? How much remedial education, how much training is needed for them to come up to speed? How do they bridge the gap if they're entering a new arena as a compliance officer? Because clearly it's an emerging space, and they need to understand the firm's underlying business.
So I think if you're looking at people that maybe come from sort of a traditional banking compliance background, obviously you're moving from a highly regulated space into a space that is really essentially catching up in terms of the regulatory side. I mean, obviously Hong Kong is rolling out its new crypto licensing regime as we speak, increasing the need for regulate cryptocurrency. Obviously the SFC is even expanding its workforce, creating 50 new positions focused purely on crypto regulation. So realistically, they're going to want to bring on individuals from those highly regulated places to help almost preempt and prepare for these changes in regulation. But I think, when it comes to looking at crypto as a whole, I think there's a culture element that comes into it as well. And I think that's something that is always going to be an adjustment from whatever background you're moving from, whether it be banking, insurance, etc. There's always going to be a time for you to adjust to the new regulatory expectations of that space.
So how big is the learning curve then in terms of their ability to transition from compliance in a more mainstream, traditional financial services environment to something that's more cutting edge like crypto?
I mean, honestly, it's a little tricky to quantify, but I'll try and put it in sort of basic terms. I think,
some people are more tech savvy and take to it more easily than others.
Absolutely. And kind of going a little bit back to what we were saying in terms of the types of talents that we're looking for, or that our clients are looking for at the moment, is really a mix in skill set, looking, strong tech backgrounds, good compliance backgrounds. I think, one of the adjustment periods is actually within crypto spaces. Obviously, structures may be a little bit smaller at the moment, a little bit flatter as they're building out. And so, realistically, you're going to have really amazing exposure in terms of the types of responsibilities that come underneath you within one role. Your role's going to be broad. And so having someone from a more varied background is always going to be an advantage.
Clearly, compliance officers are having to factor in things like geostrategic risk, geopolitical events in the region into their calculus. What are your thoughts on that? Or is it just an indication that the world's changing, you need to keep up, and there are more things you need to learn about?
I actually think that's a great question, and is again incredibly topical, particularly like, as you said, given just how much the world is changing and how much regulation is changing. And as a result, the market today is definitely placing a far higher emphasis on transferable skill sets and soft skills than organizations had done previously. So as stated, regulatory compliance has now emerged as a critical risk, which is discussed at board meetings across the spectrum of financial services. And as a result of that, it has necessitated candidates to be a lot more aware of certain geopolitical risks than perhaps previously. Executive level hiring, as I said, particularly across APAC now, is more centered, more than ever, around a balance of sorts between IQ, EQ, and an understanding of a wider spectrum of regulatory necessities or prerequisites. So as such, soft skills such as communication skills being at the very top, but a degree of business acumen, emotional intelligence, public speaking skills, as well as the ability to foster team chemistry in a positive work environment are probably the factors that, well, undeniably factors that hiring managers will look into for senior candidates. An understanding which would sort of allow them to approach the multifaceted approach to compliance as we are seeing today is a certainly like widely sought after skill set. Because moving forward, I find that the priority for financial institutions is to sort of achieve a balance of sorts between innovation as well as regulatory oversight. So the increased complexity and a documented rise in compliance costs, particularly post-COVID, has compelled institutions to try and accomplish more amidst a wider array of geopolitical risks. So there definitely has been an increased emphasis on candidates with a blend of skills within regulation, law, and technology, as well as an understanding of geopolitical risk to address the challenges posed by what is a evolving regulatory environment with the emergence of new industries such as digital assets and blockchain, as well as the emergence of cyber threats, climate change, and AI.
In the time we've got left, is there anything either of you would like to say to our audience?
I think as a whole, it's just looking at really the shift in the last few years at regulatory demand and what spaces have that. For example, the insurance space is the biggest growth area in terms of regulatory needs, and it's absolutely buzzing in terms of hiring, especially as we move into 2025. And a lot of that is due to growing complexity and variety of insurance products, especially across Asia. And along with that, a wave of innovation tackling emerging risks like climate change and also cybersecurity. I think mentioned as well before, obviously a lot of, when you look at the corporate sector, large MNCs with a presence in China especially are looking to bring on more regulatory staff, particularly people with corporate compliance and investigations experience, and obviously crypto as well, as mentioned. So I think one of the things I just want to highlight is really the breadth is getting bigger out there.
Raoul, Montgomery, Kirsty, Crean, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, thanks so much.
Our theme today is compliance, and we'll be chatting with Brian Yeung, Interactive Brokers Hong Kong-based General Counsel and Head of Compliance for the Asia-Pacific region, a role he's had for over 4.5 years. He's been with Interactive Brokers in the territory for almost 12 years, starting in 2013, starting off as its head of legal and compliance for APAC, excluding Japan. Prior to that, he was Instanet's APAC legal and compliance manager in Hong Kong. And before that, he was head of compliance for Australia for BGC Partners, based in Sydney. Having grown up in Hong Kong, he attended Yeung International School before pursuing his undergraduate degree in commerce, accounting, and finance at the University of New South Wales. He ultimately attained his Juris Doctor degree from Sydney's University of Technology, and as a solicitor, he's admitted to the Supreme Court of New South Wales. And with that, Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, AJ. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, the interesting things I didn't mention, about what compelled you to be on the path you're on, why Australia, why law, and ultimately why compliance.
Sure. Well, it's a very long story. Migrated to Sydney as a kid, as you said. After studying Yeung, I went on with my family, which a lot of Hong Kong people did back then, and then migrated to Australia. Started my legal compliance career around 2005 at one of the Australian leading brokerage firm. Stayed there for 4 years and then have various jobs. And then in 2011, I decided to move back to Hong Kong to pursue I guess hopefully a better direction for my career. And I moved back in 2011. That was the same year I got married, and luckily I have a very supportive wife. That's also
Congratulations.
we're still happily married, by the way. So that's a nutshell. In terms of where I've been. In terms of what attracted me to legal compliance, right? As I said, I started a commerce degree, graduated from UNSW. I actually started to do a actual study degree, right? But halfway through it, I figured the math was too hard for me. So I had to take a step back and look at what I would want to do. And back then, accounting and finance was made sense in terms of what I've the courses that I've done so far. But then that was around 2000, 2001, and I'm not sure if you old enough to remember that, but that was around when the Big Five consolidated in the Big Four, when Anderson
Yeah.
went down,
Around since Sarbanes-Oxley,
yeah, all that, and then the job prospect of account finance graduate would be pretty dim. So I had to look at what else I want to do and how do I establish a career. And I've always had interest in law, and mainly from watching all these TV shows like Law and Order and Boston Legal, fancying how good a lawyer can be. So I then, as I changed my major, I also applied for postgrad law degree at the UTS, as you mentioned. So that's how I got into the path of law. And since I graduated, I with my commerce background, I figured rather than working in a law firm, I wanted to do something more practical, right? So and being in the in-house legal and compliance team made sense because of the fact that we rather than just giving advice on legal interpretation and providing guidance on what to do, a legal compliance professional actually on the ground doing an interpretation as well as implementing the policies and procedures as a result of those interpretation of those laws and continue ensuring its enforcement. So the practicality of the compliance role really attracted me, and that's how I got in the industry, and here I am 20 years later.
If you look at yourself, I mean, specifically though, with Interactive Brokers, well, what would you say, given the nature of the role you're in now, and the things you're responsible for, the oversight that you have for the region, what are the biggest challenges that you face on a recurring basis?
So this is a bit of background. Interactive Brokers is an online broker, right? So we like to call ourselves the pioneer of electronic trading. So by that, we're very fintech focused, and although we may not fit perfectly into that, but I think we're very fintech focused. And the biggest challenge for myself in this role is, which occur frequently in the past 12 years that I've been here, is to be able to read the rules, understand the rules, and then interpret it and apply it to an electronic platform where a lot of things, when the rule was written, does not apply, right? We don't have people calling up clients, explaining to them what the fund is, and we don't have advisors calling up clients doing their stability checks and etc. Everything we do is on the platform. So one of the most challenging thing, not the challenging thing for my 12 years here, is to understand the rules, understand the intention behind the rules, understand what the regulatory expectation of the rules, and then applying it in a programmable way, so that we can, and then be able to explain that to the regulator so they understand what we're doing. And although sometimes it may not be to the letter of the law because the law is written for another purpose, so to speak. We need to be able to explain to them why we're doing things a certain way and how we're complying with the spirit and the intention behind what the rule is about. So that's a very frequent challenge. And more recently, the more recent rules are easier to interpret and discuss. But the code of conduct has been around for many years, and back then, electronic trading is not a thing.
You mean the SFC Code of Conduct?
Yeah, the SFC Code of Conduct and the AML Ordinance, which is more recent, but then it's changed a lot as well. I mean, regionally, look at the Corporation Act in Australia. There was first drafted in 2001. So many of these challenges are interpreting those quote unquote old law into this new age of technology.
I remember the AMLO. It came out in 2011. That was the year I started off as a Thomson Reuters regulatory and financial crime correspondent. But pick up on something you said. Apply the law in a programmable way. Well, what do you mean by that?
It's just everything we do is on the platform, right? So we need to be able to understand what the law is, understand the practical application of it.
You mean you fit the law into the algorithm?
No. To explain it in a very precise way, like kind of what lawyers is required to do, but in more detailed, and then understand what you can do electronically, right? And sometimes we require to do suitability, for example. A lot of suitability requirements are written in a way that they expect, where a person sitting in front of a client, ask them question and do assessment, and then maybe sometimes provide advice, and through a human judgment, they determine whether the client is suitable for XYZ product, right? But for us, we need to make sure that it's able to be done on the platform, and then we ask the right question, and the platform get the right reaction, and write the requirements so that decision can be made based on the questions that are given by the client, right? So that's what I meant by the programmable way. It's 0 and 1s rather than other dynamic issue. You have to consider the potential answers and scenarios so that you need to put it into 0 and 1, essentially.
Yeah. Not everything in the law, not everything in real life can be categorized in such a binary 0 and 1 format. I brought up the issue of challenges because, based on the recruiters I've spoken to, what they've told me is that amongst the highest turnover rate at many institutions are compliance officers, and not just. And part of it is because they're in high demand. Experienced compliance officers are in high demand, but also because of the stresses of the job. That at certain banks, even a small bank, for example, will have a certain number of transactions, and on a good day, the compliance guy can leave later on the evening, same day, once all the transactions have cleared. Not infrequently, it might be late into the night that same day or in the early hours the following day, but they can't leave until the transaction for that day have cleared. Highest turnover rates, they say, are in compliance. But within compliance, the highest turnover rates within compliance, they found, are in AML, KYC, CTF, sanctions. And I guess what I'm wondering is, why is that? Why is compliance so overworked? And why particular are financial crime professionals being so overworked?
The area of law has been developing constantly in the last 10 years. And as you said, MLAW came out in 2011. And then ever since then, there's a lot of changes going on in the world. And financial crime compliance is one of the area that of compliance where the rule constantly change. Like look at sanction compliance as well, which is part of financial crime. The sanctions rule in last 5 to 6 years have changed a lot, and it takes a lot of effort, I guess, for a financial crime professional to dive in and understand the requirements from the US, from China, and etc. and then digest it and then apply it. And then even for us, we do things very automatically. But the amount of time that we need to spend manually to look at financial crime issues is relatively high because a lot of the decision, as I said, is non-binary, right? So that requires professional judgment, professional assessment of things, and that is why those people are in high demand. And that's also why I think it's a very stressful job because it requires constant digestion of new rules and new changes, new sanction lists, and a lot of those things really needs a human eye to look over. Even for this basic KYC, AML, you look at the documentation, you look at the IDs and etc. So it's a lot of those is very hard to program and to have a machine to do it. So the level of stress is seemingly higher, and the ever-changing environment of financial crime and the regular refocused on financial crime also add to that stress as well, in my view.
Indeed, I mean, people have made clear to me that sometimes maybe you're more content to just be at a smaller or mid-sized financial institution, making what, maybe between 1.8 and 2.5 million, and along comes someone and you're, I don't know, they're offering you 20-30% premium. You know that within a certain number of years, you could be hitting that easily 3 million, even close to 4 million. And I remember vividly that there was one instance where they were offering a particular candidate who was making between 1.8 and 2.2 million. They were willing to go up to 2.5. They were even willing to go up to 2.8 million. The person did not want that level of stress that accompanied going to because bigger institution, deeper pockets, they could pay more. But they will work you. They expect that much more. And he had friends in that particular institution, and he's like, no, I don't. What the tether? He said, what minimal work-life balance I've got right now, I don't want to relinquish that for more money and age before my time. I mean, and it's like in some cases, even a good increase in pay isn't motivating some people, certainly younger people.
You know, I've been seeing that a lot more recently now with younger people. They focus more on work-life balance, and rightly so. I mean, for my team, I try to make sure that they have most work-life balance as possible. But to your point about bigger institution, right? The bigger institution, the financial crime requirement is not solely restricted to Hong Kong, right? They need to consider the head office requirement, which is most of the time the UK or the US, and then on top of that, on top of the Hong Kong requirements, they need to apply that. And then the bigger institution also have a lot more different department with different potential transaction, and internal policy may need to be stricter than what the rules requires to ensure sufficient control of the financial crime unit over all these different type of potential transaction, potential client type. And not least to say the client of the larger institution are more complex clients, and the time you need to do spend to do KYC and AML on these clients, it's already substantially more than what you say for a small comparatively smaller firm, where the client more simple and more direct, like individuals or just normal companies. So yeah, I've heard that as well. A lot of people would prefer work-life balance than more money to go to a job where they basically will not see their family.
Interactive Brokers is global. To what extent is it a challenge then for you to take guidelines that are handed down to you from your head office and to implement them into a local milieu like Hong Kong?
From IB's perspective, I think my because of the fact that a lot of things it's automated, it's relatively easier to make changes and to align the requirement from different jurisdiction, and it's an overarching rule of certain things, and depends on which jurisdiction have higher requirements, then we'll apply those. And to a degree, the automation of our compliance team has helped a lot with the work-life balance, because we can rely upon the automations to do a lot of checks and balances for us, and we just need to make sure that those check and balances are working. And then when there's new things coming through, we just need to adjust the relevant component of those checks to ensure that we continue to comply with the rules. So that's why I've been here at IB for 12 years, right? I think that the work-life balance here has been great, and now even with work from home policies, it's even more flexible. I can often finish up here at 6 or 7 o'clock, go home, put my kids to bed, and then dial in again for other meetings I need to have with the US.
That is wonderful. I mean, you're very blessed.
Yes.
Your counterparts in the profession.
Yeah, no. So one of the I was going to say one of the biggest challenges that I don't face currently, but then I did when I initially joined IB was there was no Teams, there's no other communication tools but to dial in on the phone, and then you usually have to do that in the office because of the secure line and things like that. So now with Teams, it's just a blessing. I mean, one of the best things that come out of COVID, if there's anything good coming out of COVID, is the tools that we have to work in different places now. It's just so much more options there.
How do you think your life would have turned out had you gone into private practice? And then the pressure would have been the perennial billable hour, right? Did I hit my target? 1,600, 1,800, 2,000 billable hours a year. I mean, when you're starting out, maybe you're probably taking home a third of what you bill, and by the time you reach a certain level of seniority, at best, half of what you're keeping half of what you bill. I mean, how do you think your life would have gone had you gone that direction?
Well, I choose this path, right, because I didn't want to go through that path of billable hours, but that's a personal choice. I think there's a lot of prestige in working in private practice, which I value, but I think I value work-life balance a bit more. And as I said in the beginning, the challenge of seeing things through, it's a bit more enjoyable than just sitting in private practice and advising the clients. Well, other than if you look at litigation, you can see the whole case through. But if you're financial services advisory, you would literally just advise the client on transactions, and sometimes you may be involved in this to see it through, but most of the time you are advising them on the rules, the requirement, and then they take it away and they drive with it, so to speak. So if I were in private practice, I think I would have left very early on, because frankly, personally, I think that's a bit boring for me in terms of just advising and not driving the whole thing through. And prestige aside, I mean, there's obviously prestige there, being a partner of a metric circle firm or something, but that's not to come with. That's a lot of challenge. As you say, you need to come up with a lot of billable hours. And on top of that, there's a lot of client meetings that you have to go to, and whining and dining clients to make sure they remember you and know who you are and talk about your skill set. A lot of them is not even on the billable hours. So,
totally, that you might work 70 hours a week, and you find out, if you're lucky, 60, more than 50, 55 hours of billable.
Yeah, something like that. So once you reach the mid-management senior associate level, you can do a lot more of that. And that, as much as I enjoy a drink after work, but I sort of prefer that with the people that I usually hang out with, and not to do that with client. But that's why I'm not in a sales role. and working in private practice, you need to have that kind of skill as well. And firstly, I don't have much skill in terms of being a sales.
certainly rainmaking, bringing in business, the social skills, seems to matter more. It seems to me in private practice, that and part of that, the dark side of that is also office politics, which is part of the reason a lot of people run away from firms.
Mhm.
Also, a lot of the reason why people don't want to join large financial institutions, because there's more money, prestige, power, clout at stake, and so the office politics can be vicious because you're dealing with very strong egos,
Yes.
very domineering type A personalities.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, and I've heard stories about politics. Luckily, I mean, in my firm, I think we're very minimal of that. I think IB strive for efficiency, and I think we're very lucky that I'm not involved in office politics. But as any firm grows, as big firms, there's certainly politics out there, and some of the people that I used to work with, I hear stories about XYZ try to push the other person out. You want to be at that meeting because you need to be seen. A lot of those considerations, and in law firms as well as big financial institutions. So I'm very lucky that we don't have that much of that.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at shows like Suits,
Oh, yeah.
it's not, people don't realize it's not that far from the truth. An aspect of the backbiting within the firm, that's very common. Certainly at your especially at your magic circle, at your white shoe, blue blood law firms, as they're called in the States, that's pretty pronounced from what I've seen, having done contract work for some of them, being brought in-house and having interacted with some of these people. But yeah, the stereotypes, the cliches are all too often very, very true. I'm curious though that, I mean, you chose the compliance path, and you've been at this for a while.
Mhm.
What do you think what does it take to be a good compliance officer?
That's a good question. Well, a good compliance officer, you need to have a very good investigation skills and skill set that allows you to look into things and understand, have a strong desire to understand why rules or things happen a certain way. Because, as I said previously, it's very important to understand where the rule comes from, where the regulator comes from, and you need a certain amount of character to do that and to understand, to be interested, to go in and understanding where things are coming from. A lot of people have a perception that lawyers become good compliance officers. That may be the case in some instances. Certainly in my case, my legal training helped me a lot. But I've seen a lot of people in the industry that have sort of the investigative background, like the auditors, the assurance consultant people. So they become very good compliance officers. So not because of their professional training, well, part of it is, but I think a key part of it is the mindset, or the investigative mindset, the interest to look into things, understand why things happen a certain way. A bit of a scientist, really, but in a financial services setting.
It's very true, because I mean, having covered this since 2006, I can honestly say that amongst the best, highly regarded people in the compliance profession writ large, I can name many that were not lawyers by training, even though this is a profession that's long been associated with the legal and accounting professions in terms of recruitment. I'm not convinced lawyers necessarily make the best compliance officers. You may disagree, but having said that, is a law degree necessary?
Oh, I don't think so. No. A lot of traders become good compliance officers too.
Yeah.
So
There's a legal and regulatory component, but the sense is you can come up to speed by learning on the spot and on the job. And that, when it comes to investigations, certainly it seems the people who are former military interrogators, former cops, former intelligence types, they know how they're better at doing investigations and the type of interviewing that needs to be done in an investigation, which differs from what you would do in preparation for litigation, because their mindset is that of a cop's mindset, which is they put the blinders on and they think everyone's guilty. And so then you have to, by deduction, you have to prove your innocence to them. But that approach seems to work well with the type of investigations that the compliance officer might sometimes have to do.
Yeah, and cops make very good regulators as well. From exactly why the reason you mentioned, right? They're very good investigators. That they assume everyone's guilty, and as much as I don't like being on the other side of it, but I do think that skill set from being a police officer makes very good regulators as well as financial crime professional. Because of that skill set.
And as you are probably aware, for over a decade now, we've run a very successful Master of Laws program in compliance at the Faculty of Law here at HKU. And we have many people, young and mid-career professionals, that pursue that degree so as to segue into a compliance role. Any advice you would offer them as they seek out a compliance career?
Yes, I think key thing as to any other career is do it for the right reason. I think do it because you enjoy the work that come with it. Because as you say, Jay, although everyone strive for work-life balance, you don't necessarily get that. You need to enjoy what you do. I enjoy the fact that I interpret the law and then I follow through with things and the practical side of financial services as well, on how to implement the rules and regulations. Right. So you got to find what you enjoy and make that the reason of you to pursue a career in your chosen profession. And compliance officer can be tough, can be a tough job, but if you enjoy it, that makes it that much easier to go through your day.
Ryan Yeung, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, AJ. Appreciate it.
And to our listeners, thank you. Until next time.